Welcome to I've Always Wanted to Watch That, a spin-off podcast from the Average Joe's Movie Clubcast. I'm Justin. In this podcast, I get the pleasure of talking to fellow cinephiles to discuss their love of movies, along with reviewing a film at least one of us has always wanted to check out, but for some reason has always put off for some reason. In this episode, I welcome back Adam Davie to the Average Joe's Podcast Network as we get ready to have all kinds of movie conversations, along with digging into the gut-wrenching true crime documentary Dear Zachary, a letter to a son about his father. Welcome, Adam. We were just chatting before we started. It's been 2 years since we got together and talked about Nightcrawler and Blue Valentine. How you been?
I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm glad. It's so interesting that you brought up the movies that we watched the last time we were on a call because to some, they might be a little stressful, they might be a little gut-wrenching, and it seems like today we're going to follow up that trend by talking about another gut-wrenching film, and if I would say a film that outdoes both of those films combined.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I have no idea what you think about Dear Zachary, so it should be really good to dig into that. So tell the folks, maybe who hadn't listened to you before, about yourself, your habits watching movies, and yeah, let's get to know Adam.
So I should really talk about that in terms of number one, my journey as a cinephile, and then number two, my journey on Letterboxd, because for me, there's this conversation wouldn't be happening. I wouldn't be on Letterboxd if I hadn't taken, started that journey as a film watcher, and not just a film watcher, but a movie lover, and then the coveted term of cinephile that sometimes is given to us by others, or that we sometimes give to ourselves. I would definitely say at this point in my journey, I have given that to myself, and because I find myself at a point where my taste, my level of activity in terms of movie watching, and just my excitement for, I don't want to say all things movie related, because I like very specific types of films, but I would say most things movie related are far greater than I would say the average to the average person. Long story short, I began watching films, I would say seriously, in 2005, 2006. I was enamored with The Last Samurai, which was the Tom Cruise, film that was, I don't want to make sure I get the director's name, where Edward Zwick. It was directed by Edward Zwick in 2003. So it actually goes back further than that. I said 2006, but yeah, it was actually 2005 maybe that I watched that film for the first time, and I was just enamored with it, more so because of the samurai and the code that they live by, and Tom Cruise's relationship to them as he sought to heal himself, both like physically and mentally. As a result, because he for those who know the film, he is a broken man at the beginning of that film. So it started with that. Eventually, I found that I had a taste for samurai films, and from there, I'm thinking, okay, I want to watch more samurai films. So you go to Google, say, hey, what's a good samurai film? And there were a number of movies on whatever list I found at the time. I can't remember, but one of them was Seven Samurai. So I remember going to a local video store where I live, and trying to find this film, Seven Samurai. I remember at the time, and this is like 2005 DVDs, the whole HD DVD versus Blu-ray battle. You remember that? That had already taken place. DVDs had already come. In DVDs, they were already going out of style because people were like, oh, wow, you can get HD DVDs or Blu-ray DVDs. Blu-ray clearly won. So you're kind of in that period now where everything is starting to move to high definition. But I remember going to this video store, and they still sold still rented VHS tapes. And I remember getting the Seven Samurai tape, and it was on two tapes. which I thought was really cool. I was so excited to watch this movie. Took it home, popped it in, watched it. Thought this is awesome. Gonna watch it again. And So that eventually just took place. And over time, that clearly became my favorite film. But eventually, I decided that I wanted to get a an actual copy for myself, because I had a copy. I think it was from like Korea or something like that. So the subtitles were all jacked up. There were no special features. I wanted something really nice, and that's how I stumbled on the Criterion Collection. Because as far as I know, I believe I should know this by heart, but I'm pulling it up right now. I believe that Seven Samurai has to be like either spine number 2 or spine number 3.
Yeah, it's spine 2, I believe.
Spine 2, yeah. So it was spine number 2. So it's been in the collection almost since day one, and I eventually picked that up.
Before that, I think.
So. Yes, you are correct. Yeah, along with other films like RoboCop and a few others that are no longer in the collection, which kind of sucks. I'd love to get a Criterion Collection version of RoboCop. But anyways, like I said, found that film, continued to watch it, loved it, and eventually just thought to myself, hey man, I'm going to watch more films from this Criterion Collection, because if I can find one of another Seven Samurai, that would be awesome. And so that kind of started my journey, both as a cinephile and both as a lover of everything Criterion related. And that led me to Letterboxd, because and I'd be interested in hearing from you, how you cataloged everything and how you thought about film before you had an online platform to do so. But before Letterboxd came in, I was journaling things, I watched this on this date, or eventually when I started to become more serious about film and I wanted to understand what I was watching a bit better. I was reading textbooks, which I still enjoy today, which I'm probably not the only one, but I know that not everybody likes to read textbooks when they're not in school.
Like film class textbooks?
Film class textbooks. Yeah, so I've got a couple, including no one will be able to see this, but it's except for you. But it's called A Short Guide to Writing About Film by a film professor who I guess at the time was at Temple University, Timothy Corrigan. So I always come back and read this every now and then to help me, in order to help organize my thoughts and my writing and stuff like that. And that, the love of cinema, combined with my supposed deep thoughts about cinema, and my endless need to write everything down, catalog everything in order to remember things, eventually led me to Letterboxd. And Letterboxd had been around, I think, has been around since 2012, maybe, if I'm correct. And I was just amazed that I had never heard of Letterboxd throughout all of these years. I mean, I know IMDb was big, and I'm sure that you, like me, were a bit sad when the IMDb forums were shut down, because they had basically become like a cesspool of just trolls and other individuals who just weren't contributing anything to the discussion. But so Letterboxd was kind of a safe haven in a bit, because it was so niche in that. Unlike IMDb, which I guess probably had reached the point where it was just maybe a bit ubiquitous. If you're just looking for general movie information, obviously that's going to attract more people, which you get the good with the bad. Whereas Letterboxd, you get a little bit of that, but I'd like to, and like I said, I'd like to get your thoughts on this too, both in terms of your journey and your thoughts on where the company itself and the app and stuff like that, where that stands. But there just seems to be something different about Letterboxd, where it doesn't seem to invite that same level of maybe vitriol and harshness in terms of the people who populate it. As say IMDb and some of the some other platforms, or social media platforms in this case, because for me, I mean, it every time I log on, it feels like home. You're going to be able to read some good reviews, get some good discussions going in terms of film, and I still write everything down in terms of what I'm watching, but Letterboxd has been my preferred platform, both to write about film, think about film, and connect with others like yourself who enjoy watching and talking about movies.
Absolutely. Um, so I had always kind of fantasized about wanting to be some kind of movie critic growing up, and didn't really make that much of a reality until I worked for a TV station. My coworker who was in charge of our internet's like, "Oh, we need some blogs going." So I was like, "Oh, can I do a movie review blog?" And so I think I dived in first. I think it was like Transformers 3, and it's funny, like you have all these ideas of what you want to say about a film, but then when you go to type it, it all of a sudden gets all blocked up. So
Mm-hmm.
it was quite a journey. I would say several years of really finding my voice as as a movie lover, and just kind of putting that to yeah, posting that, and definitely found my rhythm in terms of different little tools I like to use in order to make it more interesting. So found out about Letterboxd just through a random guy talking about movies on YouTube. Checked it out, and I think the reason Letterboxd kind of doesn't attract so much of the trolls, like I guess a troll can just like pop up on IMDb and just comment, wherever, and kind of be snarky, or Twitter or so forth. But there's a real commitment level, I would say, to Letterboxd, to where you feel like you have to establish this page and you have to go out and find stuff. I think there's a level of effort there that detracts some of the people that like it quick and dirty, and kind of cynical or not so nice about it. So I mean, there's those there, and a large part of Letterboxd, is, I wouldn't say like the short one-liner comments are stand out to me as much. Maybe I don't follow as many of those people, but for a while those seem like to be like the key things that were getting most attention on Letterboxd. To where now I think it's more of an even playing field. I'm not sure. Have you seen much of a difference there?
You know what? I haven't, but like you, I haven't, uh, and I don't pay much attention to those who do write short reviews. I follow a few people who, maybe they're not, the most active on Letterboxd, and when they do write something, and maybe a sentence or a few sentences that may add up to a review, a quote unquote review of a film. But unlike like, and I don't want to call them trolls, but like the trolls, I don't follow a lot of people who actively seek attention through like the minimalist, snarky writing, because one of the things that I love about the platform, despite the fact um, that some of the shorter, snarky reviews get more attention than some of the more well thought out pieces, is that it kind of teaches you not to take things too seriously, because at the end of the day, it's just a movie. It's just everybody's having a good time, and I would much rather, now that you bring this up, it's my thoughts are just coming to me, right and left here. I would much rather have a bunch of snarky reviews but people who are taking the platform seriously and are good stewards of, like the relationships and, like I said, the platform itself, versus a bunch of people who were, trolling or incredibly opinionated, but just off-putting, if that makes sense. Because that happens too, where you get some people who think they are so right about in terms of their views on a film, or that another person is just so wrong that it just completely ruins the experience. Um, Versus just saying, hey, I read what you wrote about that, and I think you're kind of on track. But here's what I think, which is a much better way to kind of approach things, because of course people are going to have different opinions, but you don't run the risk of turning into basically, like, to use internet slang, like a flame war, you know what I mean, where people go back and forth and stuff like that. But I think, like I said, Letterboxd has done a good job of that in terms of like moderating all of the content. You know what I mean? They're very responsive. Like if someone is spamming you, or harassing you. I mean, I've you have the block feature as well, which goes back to your point, like in terms of like you having to put in the effort, and then once you put in the effort, like you can't be derailed very easily, because at the end of the day, if somebody is showing something, or saying something on your under your profile that you don't agree with, you can delete the comment, you can block that person, you can report them to Letterboxd, and get them kicked off. So, long story short, I just think that, like I said, they do a good job of managing things. The people there, to your point, they go about setting up their profiles, and they're very careful to take care of it. And at the end of the day, I think the good thing about Letterboxd is, relative, compared to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, these other platforms, they're still very, very small. And I think that, once you reach a certain scale, you're going to bring in a bunch of people who with differing opinions, at different stages of their life, and so on and so forth. And that also invites dissension and conflict as well. Also, I think that another great thing that they've done, and that can't be overstated, is that it's, you see like mini series pop up when you're, searching or reviewing films, or, whatnot, but TV isn't a part of their platform in terms of like what you can search for. So I think that helps too, because I do think a lot more people get sucked into TV, whether it be certain shows like I'm not sure if The Crown shows up, like the Netflix show about the Queen of England, her family, and all that stuff. So, but like I said, I do think that like limiting it to just films helps too. So there's a lot of things that they do well, and overall it just makes for a better experience for folks like you and I, and anyone else who wants to engage with the platform.
And I would say like the vast majority of people I've met on Letterboxd are really, really interesting to talk to. Like I've built this whole like podcast series off of like, forming these relationships with various people, and reaching out. And it's funny, every time I dial somebody up, it's like we're speaking the same kind of language in terms of love for movies, and it always flows so well, and interesting perspectives. Even today, like somebody commented on my like Discreet Charm and the Bourgeoisie, and I wrote that review like 3-4 years ago, and they're like, I guess you didn't know what that movie was about. And at some point I'll probably go back in and try to say something. My approach is usually kill them with kindness. Like people get a little snarky sometimes, and I'll be like, well, I haven't really watched the Decalogue in 2 years, so I'd have to recheck that out and see if that opinion holds up in my opinion. I was like, I can't really tell you my full thoughts on episode 2 where the fly gets stuck in the drink or whatever right now, but it's funny how
it's just funny. Yeah, it is funny how that works, because at the end, we come back to this again and again. Reviews, whether they're from someone like you or I, or from Roger Ebert, or from someone at the New York Times like Manola Dargis, or someone more established. At the end of the day, it's somebody's opinion, and I will never get upset, over another person's opinion, because they absolutely have the right to. But like you said, it's how it's delivered. And the only thing, I guess, in that case that you can control is your response. And like I said, I think it's another good thing that, for the most part, most people are pretty good about accepting criticism on the platform as well. Because at the end of the day, I found, and I had to arrive to this over time, that I'm much more interested in a conversation than I am any sort of likes or followers. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure you've noticed this as well. Like if you look at your ratio of like followers to likes, I've always noticed that they hover, for me at least, around like 1%. So like I have like 1,900 people following me right now. And so, but I think the last review I posted for Saint Omer had like maybe 9 likes or something like that. So, when it comes down to it, I'm, and this is why I only follow 35 people. Like, I am much more interested in engagement than I am like acknowledgement, or if that makes sense, because you can have a lot of people follow you, and um, have a lot. There's always a lot of if you go to like the Letterboxd Reddit forums and stuff like that, that's like the number one question that people ask. How do I get more people to follow me and things like that? But that doesn't always translate to a relationship, as you described, or engagement, even if you're not talking to somebody face to face, virtually, like we are right now. So I am, of the opinion that, like I said, I will take, criticisms and take in new information from whoever wants to provide it, as long as they're sincere in their efforts and they're interested in engaging with me on, and everything is on the level, if that makes sense. Because at the end of the day, that's, if the platform, I don't think it would exist in the way it does now and have the reach and the influence that it has now if people weren't, engaged with each other. If everybody was just clicking the like button and then going on to something else. Hopefully that makes sense. And I would imagine they might feel the same way.
One of the interesting things I find is everybody I want to invite to Letterboxd, sometimes they'll come in and they'll see that, I spent all this time writing these reviews, and they're like, oh, well, I can't do that. I'm like, you don't have to. You can use it in the way you want to. I mean, it's all about like seeing what somebody watched and so forth. So I totally am on board with it. Everybody letterboxes differently, and I mean, there's no right way to do it. I mean, I really am impressed with, going back to those that interaction you had talked about. I mean, some of your reviews, I mean, it's like 20, 30 comments long of these really detailed conversations you have back and forth, which unfortunately I don't have the energy for. I try to muster some responses, but I put most of my energy towards the actual review itself, which thankfully I've gotten a little bit more streamlined with. I suffered with OCD for the longest time, so it was I'd get all nervous about posting and if it was all clean and stuff, but thankfully I've gotten it more down to a rhythm to where I'm enjoying, and to me it's all about having that record of what I watched, what I thought about it, which is fascinating, especially for I just did a podcast on La Hen, where I had watched it the first time, and then I podcasted it with Joey the second time, and then I joined another podcast the third time. So seeing the three evolutions of how I thought about the movie and how much more I think about it now than I did then, and the themes and stuff, it's remarkable how much you grow. And yeah, it's fascinating to look back at some of your early reviews and see what it was all about. So you recently had this huge accomplishment of pretty much watching all the Criterion Collection, and you collaborated with Letterboxd, and they published an article about it.
Yeah, so that was exciting because I was planning to write a handwritten letter to folks at Criterion and just mail it to their office and hope that somebody read it. I brought it up to their editor-in-chief, Gemma Gracewood, and she mentioned that it'd probably be a good idea if I wrote about it. And had them publish it on Journal, which their online magazine. It was a much better idea because not only did the folks at a few of the folks at Criterion, read the article, which I was able to confirm with someone who works there.
Nice.
But also there were folks at the Letterboxd, within the Letterboxd community who got to read it too. And I know that there are people, like myself, who are also on this journey. There are probably some people who are, have 10 films left. There are probably some who have 100, and there are probably some who have like 1,100, which would just boggles my mind,
Yeah, I'm not quite that bad. Probably like 700 or so.
Yeah, 700. But, what's interesting, I'm trying to remember where I was in terms of the spines, but I think I was around number 650 or something like that. I'm going to go back. I'm just going to scroll through my diary here as I chat with you about this. But at the time, it didn't really feel that daunting because, people talk about, if you do something that you love, talking about your career, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, like being a cinephile is no different. There's, I don't want to say there isn't a lot of effort that goes into it, because when you commit to watching some of the films that Criterion has released, and then you commit to writing about them, that's a totally different ballgame, because you are crossing continents, you're going back and forward in time, depending on the subject matter. You're dealing with different languages and
Historical context.
historical context, cultural context. You're dealing with themes that may not be familiar to you as a man. In terms of when you're watching stories about what women have gone through, both if it's both a drama, or if it's a documentary about a real life subject, and so on and so forth. So it's taxing, but at the same time, it is something that I've enjoyed, because I do think, and I truly believe, that watching certain films, watching the right movies, is a way to combat, and I noted this in my Criterion article, it is a way to combat the ignorance that some of us are born into or learn over time as a result of our upbringing and our social connections. And the great thing about about movies is that they don't command, they don't discipline. They seem to just kind of offer up themselves and say, this is a way of being. This is a way to live. This is how someone has lived. And every film itself is a learning experience. Every film, someone on the Letterboxd podcast said it at one point in time. I'm not sure who the guest was, but they said like every film is a miracle. So, when you do sit down and watch them, you have to be appreciative not only of the craft itself, but what certain films are able to convey. And like I said, if you just watch, Criterion films, you will learn a lot about the world that we live in, and not just within your within North America, I guess, but just both in terms of the world, both in terms of like history, and it's just I think a beautiful way to approach a film challenge, because not only was I entertained, and we may have to come back to this because I'll have to elaborate on it, but not only was I entertained, but like I said, I was instructed as well. And I do find the instruction and learning opportunities, I guess, that a film offers as entertaining as the spectacle itself. And the journey was never felt like work. It always felt like a labor of love.
Oh, absolutely. And going back to two things you had mentioned earlier. So you had mentioned about longer podcasts, and what I find myself, there's a few podcasts I listen to pretty regularly, and I often find myself disagreeing with what they're saying, and I get so irritated when I find these these all or nothing kind of point of views, like a film has to do this, this, and this in order for it to be good. Otherwise, it's failing. One example is they were talking about the movie Prey, the new Predator movie, and the guy was going on and on about how much better it would have been if it would have been all in the Native American language. And I'm like, most of the people watching this movie don't want to be reading subtitles. I mean, yeah, that movie has its faults with it feeling very modern in this ancient or older native kind of setting, but at the same time, I mean, you got to read your audience. I don't think every audience is coming in with those same kind of expectations as that certain reviewer who kind of puts movies in a certain box placement, and that's all fine and good for if they want to view it. But to say that everybody needs to view a film in a certain way, it gets under my skin. So I'm constantly in my reviews, I'm like, in my humble opinion, this is what I think about this, and let's discuss it because it's all subjective.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and that is, I think, the only way that you will then be open to learning about certain films and why they have the impact on people that they people that they do. The other interesting thing about Letterboxd is that you can write about a Mexican film from your experience, but then you may get someone from Mexico who may jump into the comments section. And maybe they don't correct you, but maybe they applaud you for watching the film, and because they're so appreciative, they may provide you with additional context or share with you other movies that you can watch in order to deepen your understanding of the themes of the film, of Mexican culture, for example. And because of you just had that great conversation. You now maybe it's a very tenuous connection, but you've established a connection with someone in another part of the world, which I always found to be pretty cool, because there are people now where I feel like, man, if I went to in your case, if I went to South Carolina, we could sit down. We could have a drink. We could have, have a burger and some fries or something like that. And it would be like, because we have this shared interest in films, it'd be like talking to an old friend. And I feel like I could go, south of the border or go to another continent because of the years of conversations that I've built up. And I think that because I've also, and I think you've done a good job of this as well. And it starts with something as simple as like, your avatar, your profile picture. You know what I mean? Like showing people like who you are. Like I never wanted to hide who I was. Like if I'm going to post something on Letterboxd, then you're going to know it's from me. That's why my first and last name is there. That's why my picture is there. So if you see me in the street and you disagree, then great, come up to me and let's have a conversation about it. I'm all ears. But I find that like being like open, being very transparent, and also, letting people know that, hey, like there are certain times when I watch certain films that are released by Criterion, and I'd let people know in my reviews, hey, I don't know what this is about. So if you know what this is about, let me know. And I, over time, like I said, that also helps, with getting to know people better, because people are more than willing to share their knowledge, and as a result, like I said, you just build up, like I said, these friendships and relationships that become more fulfilling for me as time goes on.
I'm not sure if I'd ever shared this with you, but when I first became friends with you, your profile picture I think had you playing soccer, and so I had the impression you were that was like your favorite soccer player, and then you changed your profile, and it's like, oh, it's the same guy, just kind of more casual. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I'm trying now. You've got me. I'm trying to think where I was when I took that profile picture. I might have been at a golf tournament. If we're thinking about the same picture, it might have been the U.S. Open at Oakmont Country Club. So if it was, I'm not sure if you remember what I was wearing, but I was wearing like a yellow T-shirt in that picture, and that might be the picture that you're referring to. If you saw a lot of green in the background,
I think so,
which made you think of a soccer pitch. But yeah, so and that's interesting too, because I could talk about, for instance, your follower to following count all day, all night long, because I'm quite fascinated by the fact that, number one, you have a lot of people following you. Number two, you follow a lot of people, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to be just for clout. You seem to have, as you alluded to earlier, like a deeper connection with a lot of the people that you follow. So like, how can you just talk about that, how that came about? And then I'll kind of talk to you about, or actually I'll just say that, like if you look at my following the follower account right now, I'm very much interested in maintaining very close, intimate relationships with the people that I talk about, even if the subject is just related to film. It makes no difference whether it's on this platform or in real life, but you've taken the opposite approach, but at the same time, you've also formed these deep connections. So can you talk about that? Because that's something I've always been fascinated by.
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely was seeking, because I remember when I first joined, I would go through and I would like the top 25 people, and then I would like people that like them. So there was a lot of liking at first. But at the same time, there was that own passion for creating my own. stuff. And I'll admit I'm not very good at reading other people's reviews. Most times, whenever people like reach out to me, then I'm like, oh, okay, that's what they thought. But there's yeah, so much. So but yeah, whenever I do start that kind of back and forth conversation in the comments, that's when I get more involved with like reading their thoughts on the different matters or so forth. But yeah, it was. I remember I had posted a review on Ghost Story, and that was like the first review that hit like the 50 like mark, and that was super gratifying to know to see that it was actually affecting people. And out of nowhere, whenever my Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse review was like one of my most popular reviews for the longest time, and that really surged up there. A lot of comic book movies, that was kind of the deal. A lot of people would like my comic book reviews.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was a combination of really putting myself out there on Letterboxd, between like following up and liking other people's stuff and just being committed to what I was doing. And I'm much more just kind of in my own lane of like watching films, talking about films, people that I've formed connections with like yourself, having longer, deeper conversations, maybe getting on podcasts with. But yeah, I've kind of let the seeking attention kind of fall to the wayside, and I pretty much just kind of playing in my own sandbox, like the Coens said whenever they grabbed that Best Picture Oscar.
Now, do you find that it helps to watch more popular films? Because my road to gaining, some sort of popularity on Letterboxd, was completely different. I started out by following every single person who followed me, but then I realized I wasn't just interested in followers. I actually wanted to read what these people were writing, and I realized I couldn't do that if I followed, 100 people, let alone 1,000. So slowly over time, I would monitor, the different accounts of like the people that I followed. And then eventually, if someone wasn't on the platform for 6 months, or they were just, and this goes for anyone who's listening to this podcast. Like, if someone follows you, the first thing you need to do is go to their activity feed. Like, and if you see, number one, if you see that they're just following hundreds of people at a time, do not engage with them. And so you take it a step further. If you just see that they're just logging things, but there are no comments and no reviews, then you may want to reconsider, because it's always like unfollowing somebody on any platform. It's so rough. It's so, and most people don't know. They don't care, and eventually, I stop caring after a while too. But I'm like I said, it goes back to intention and wanting to create bonds that are stronger than maybe what the internet can provide, if that makes sense. Because you and I, I think we're good people. So if we just were chatting online without seeing each other's faces or hearing each other's voice, I think that things would be civil and we'd be okay. But now we've taken the next step to virtually meet. We see each other face to face, eye to eye, and we've deepened that connection. So the level, I think, of respect and of trust has increased, and as a result, that's going to lead to more meaningful relationship as it relates to our film journeys. And then, for most of the relationships that you have, the strongest relationships, they're taking place in real life. I think it would be very, very tough to say, no matter how often we spoke and how often we got to know each other, let's say that took place over the course of 20 years, I think it would be very, very tough for you to say that I was your best friend, or for me to say that you were my best friend, if all of our conversations just took place online, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm getting at is that, I mean, for me at least, it takes, I can't separate, my real life self from my online self. And that goes back to like the profile picture, the reviews, my style of writing, and the way that I engage with people. And like I said, it contrasts maybe with the way that you went about doing things in terms of gaining some notoriety on the platform. But at the end of the day, we intersected at the point of, like I said, like meaningful engagement with the people that we do interact with, which is kind of amazing that we kind of went through like these different routes, but arrived at the same point, both in terms of like us speaking here today, and in terms of like how we the maybe like the seriousness to which we like take our or just the responsibility that we feel we have with our profiles and with Letterboxd in general.
And I thank you for taking the biggest first step whenever you asked me to join our little club that we've had going for a couple years now. We've watched 49 movies to date.
Yes.
Starting off with, hey, should we watch some, what was it?
It was a Shakespearean film. Was
Orson Welles.
The Orson Welles film, the first film. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It Chimes at Midnight, which I did not care for, although I think we came back, or no, sorry, it was a Criterion release. Eventually, I did come around to enjoying one of his Shakespeare adaptations with Othello. But Chimes at Midnight, it just wasn't for me. I think that you had a bit more of experience with Shakespeare. So from what I remember, I think you enjoyed it more than I did. Although I'm going to the review right now. And,
it was a pretty tough nut to crack, especially if you're not familiar with the story, and that's what kind of a conglomeration of a couple stories. So it was an interesting start. I mean, we dove into the whole Jackie Chan trilogy there. You got me to watch War and Peace, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I think it was between that and Napoleon. I'm like, oh my gosh, those are two humongous things. Let's go with the Russian one.
Yeah, to this, speaking of which, I don't know where I'd be able to watch Napoleon. You're talking about the Abel Gance film from like the 1920s, 1930s, or something like that.
I think it's from the 60s. It was like peak Soviet filmmaking. They really put a lot of money into that 65 version in order to kind of like show up Hollywood.
Okay, yeah, so we're talking about different versions, because there is a version out there that is 333 minutes, and it's supposed to be really good. But I'm always astounded when films like these have such high ratings, but yeah, you can't find them anywhere. But at the same time, if there's no commercial appeal, then no company, whether it be a streamer or physical distribution like company, is going to take a chance on releasing them. Although I'm sure that Criterion has probably mulled this over at some point in time, because I'm sure that there's a market for it, especially among hardcore cinephiles.
And then about a year into go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say about a year into it, we watched Sunrise, and then around that time we're like, hey, let's just follow through and watch all of these Best Picture winners. And so yeah.
I'd have to go back through the comment section to figure out how we got started on that, but I wonder if we were watching that film, and by that film I mean Sunrise, close to Oscar season, because at the time I don't recall being like infatuated with the Oscars, and I actually watched this a day before my 36th birthday on June 22nd, 2020. I watched it again, and maybe shortly thereafter we had a conversation about watching the Best Picture winners. And right now there are 248 comments between us, so I'm not going to go through all of those comments. But I eventually, like I said, we got on that subject, and it was an amazing ride, because the winners they're varied. There's no specific thing that I can point to regarding the themes. They change over time. They are, sometimes the films are very visceral, like All Quiet on the Western Front, or they're very light and whimsy, like My Fair Lady or a Tom Jones, or maybe a film like The Broadway Melody, which which was probably one of the weaker films in the entire list of Best Picture winners. Although,
did I ever tell you that I watched the wrong movie first?
Yes, you did. I remember seeing it. I think there may be.
I think I watched
There's
like the
actually comment
39
on.
version or something.
Yeah, yeah. There were two versions, and the 29 version is interesting because I think it's one of the earliest depictions of like a musical in terms of like the actual structure of the film.
And it was
Um,
interesting to see how prolific MGM was back then, because I think Broadway musical, Grand Hotel, all those like early ones were all like
yes,
MGM, that lion. So that was neat
yes,
to see.
yeah. It was. It really was.
Um, I got Cimarron here. A lot of people pan that one for being a pretty shallow, Western, but it was kind of interesting seeing that whole Western expansion and learning about that particular Oklahoma. I think he became like an Oklahoma lawmaker at some point. So
Yes.
not the best film, but it's neat to crack into these little corners. I never had a desire to watch Spotlight, but man, I cried the whole way through that one, and
Mm.
it really touched my journalistic side.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that's it's funny as you bring that up because right next to Spotlight, um, after we watch How Green Was My Valley, is a film Marty,
Hmm.
which I was blown away by.
Yeah,
It is
touching little
uh,
number.
a touching film that I wouldn't associate with what the term best picture means now, because I do think over time, or actually maybe it's always been this way that you want films that are commercial that are going to, at least as far as the production of the Oscars goes, that are going to bring in people that they're going to be able to maybe relate to films that are going to make them feel good. And Marty is a film that does end on a bit of a happy note. It's about a man played by Ernest Borgnine
Lives with
who
his mother, right? His mother. I
lives with
remember
his
his mother really
mother.
being a character.
Yeah, yeah, she was, and throughout the film, he is struggling um, to find love, and he meets a woman played by Betsy Blair, and the film is all about their interactions, and kind of goes back to that old formula: will they, won't they? But they seem to get um, more in their own way because of their own hangups, rather than like these outside forces kind of keeping them apart. From other films that I can think of, like Bringing Up Baby, which had like a leopard come between Cary Grant and Catherine Hepburn. There's nothing like this in this film. There's just like Ernest Borgnine particularly. His own anxieties about his appearance and his lot in life, his station in life, and how that um, what that means for his prospects for love. And like I said, I was just blown away by it. I rarely give a film 4 stars, more than 4 stars. The first time out, but I did give this film 4 stars. I reviewed it. I loved it, and I am it's been nice over time to see more films pop up like that, because I do think if something like this was made today, it would very much be it would be an independent feature. It probably wouldn't cost very much, and it would be it would be equivalent to, say, like a Coda, like a film just starting out at like a Sundance, and just kind of chugging along and charming people as it chugged along, and
Yeah.
eventually reaching the pinnacle of during award season. So that was we could probably talk about that for days. But there are there any others that stood out with you? Whether good or bad, that you appreciated watching, or that you just were banging your head against the wall after watching it, wondering why this film received the Best Picture award, let alone a nomination.
Yeah, we can go through a few of these and briefly mention like our lasting impact. I'd seen Wings before, but I was really kind of blown away with the action sequences in that, especially for being a black and white silent film, best picture winner. It's just the battle sequences in there just really were a lot more, I guess, intense and visually captivating than I ever imagined from a film that old.
hmm
Do you remember a thing about Grand Hotel?
I don't, or very, very little.
Hmm.
Although correct me if I'm wrong here, or I hope you remember,
It
but I
takes
do
place in Germany,
remember
right?
takes place in Germany, and I do remember someone sneaking into someone's hotel room.
Hmm.
But then there's another character that's already there, and they have to try to figure out how to get around that. And but it was pretty much an ensemble piece, and there were
Yeah,
a whole lot
large
of
cast.
characters that was taking place, and it was quite honestly, it was very entertaining. I thought
Hmm.
I thought it was wonderful, and I see it. I just had a film, on the tip of my tongue, but it kind of eludes me now. Maybe I'll remember it here in a moment. But it reminded me of another ensemble piece that was like highly regarded by the Academy. But I'll come back to it. But overall, like I said, I enjoyed the film. But sometimes it's one of those films that I think I enjoyed. I may go back to it, but it didn't really spark a lot of thought and a lot of discussion. And for me
More of
at
a
least, I know you.
checklist
Yeah,
movie.
it's definitely a checklist, film, and and for me, as even though I love film, and I could write about any film if someone asked me to. I'm really, really passionate about films that I really love or that I really hate. Like there's no in between. And I'm sure
Okay.
that other people are like that too. So I would say one of the things I admire about you is that throughout this entire process,
For better or
not only did you
worse.
watch these films, you also wrote about them. And so like I said, I've always admired that about your reviews, particularly your ability. You take the notes. I'm sure if you wanted to write about a film from start to finish, you could. But there's always like great structure to what you're watching. So I know it seems like no matter what you're watching, you always seem to get a lot out of
I try. Between what I remember, what the impression it left, flicking back through it, maybe getting into some of the quotes. So I would say All Quiet on the Western Front definitely was probably one of the best first ones. Don't remember a whole lot about it. I was a little, it being in English and being about Germans, you got that little line. But I'm curious to. I started the new one it's nominated this year. I got to finish it because it was just I kept having to come back to it, and so I got to restart it from the beginning. But All Quiet on the Western
it.
Front definitely remember being an early favorite.
There's some others here that really stand out. I'll highlight Argo
Okay.
from because from a technical standpoint, that film was excellent. And so if you're watching that as an Academy member, maybe you're in like the crafts or something like that, and maybe you're in sound design, sound editing, stuff like that. I mean, the opening sequence from that film, when the U.S. I want to say embassy is stormed by the Iranians, it's probably one of the more tense
Hmm.
and well put together um, sequences that I've seen in a film in quite some time, and it really just kind of lays the groundwork for everything that's to come after it, and it does so much at the beginning of the film in terms of establishing why Ben Affleck's character needs to be there and why they need to take such dramatic measures in order to get the however number of hostages out of that country. It just does a good job of setting that up so you don't have to retread uh, certain plot points over and over again. So I would imagine if you're sitting there and I can't remember how many awards that film ended up winning, but if you were watching that film and then watching the others, I would imagine that during that year that film would have probably stuck more in a voter's mind than maybe some of the other films. A film like Dances with Wolves, which probably has I would have imagined at the time, prior to watching it, would have had um, maybe some controversial elements to it. I thought was very well done and respectful of indigenous culture, indigenous history. Obviously, they're not going to get everything right because at the end of the day, I would imagine that the number of people behind the camera, in terms of script writers, technicians, things like that, were far fewer than the number of people who were actually in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm.
But
Costner kind of
I
at the peak of his power at that point.
yeah, exactly. And obviously you look
Early
at some
peak.
of
I
the
mean, shoot, he's
yeah
in
early
what
peak absolutely.
Yellowstone now, and he's
Yes,
huge.
he's still doing he's still doing amazing things. But like in this film, I found, like I said, not everything about it to be very respectful and very honorable. So I could see why a film like that would also garner some attention. But then, like I said, there's some other films too where, and like I said, you go from like these films that are very whimsy and very um, playful to some, and I'm thinking of films like Oliver or um, Gigi, which I
Ugh.
do not care for,
Yucky.
or even Tom Jones. We're not going to spend time on those. But then you have something that comes many many years later, like Kramer versus Kramer, which just is
Mm.
very serious and um, but probably for many people who are watching it, very personal film about a family falling apart that does not have a very very happy ending, but it does have a peaceful resolution because it shows that at the end of the day, two people can come together to do what's best for the next generation. In the case of Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman's character, because they have a son in the film, and it's just to see all of these films like as a collection. Like I said, there's no overarching theme or reason why, but even as it relates to like, even if you took a look at things historically, like you still wouldn't be able to like identify why this particular film
Well, it is
wanted.
interesting, like films with like Miss Miniver. I mean, there's so many films where like the British were trying to get the Americans into the war effort, so they were telling these stories of what they were going through with the Nazis and
Yes,
being on the war front. So you watch things like Miss Miniver, blanking, but there's Forward
From Here to
Correspondent by
Eternity.
Hitchcock. What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say From Here to Eternity.
Oh
That
yeah,
was a few
that
years after World War II, but
because
I'm sure that there were folks who had um, fought in the war who were then back in Hollywood working and acting, and I'm sure a film like that probably stuck with them more so than whatever else was nominated that year.
um. What's the last one I would want to mention? I get Mutiny on the Bounty might be one of my favorites of the bunch. Clark Gable is definitely one of my favorite actors of the golden era of Hollywood. Between
Mm.
that one, It Happened One Night. I mean, you have Gone with the Wind. I mean, Clark Gable's what a boss. So, any early like Joey's is definitely Humphrey Bogart. Any early Hollywood actors actresses that really that charm you?
Well, I'd say watching films like Bringing Up Baby and a few others that I'll try to remember here quickly.
Okay.
I've always been enamored by like Cary Grant because I am not a big fan of certain films simply because they have a star in them, but I do understand star power. And it's amazing how a star can take, a average script and turn it into something that you want to see. An average story, or an average, performance by say their co-star, and turn it into something that is worth watching. And I've always felt that Cary Grant had that ability. Uh, if I'm thinking of actresses, then for me, I've always been attracted to more intense films or drawn to more intense films and intensity in terms of acting. So someone maybe like Joan Crawford or Betty Davis are two individuals who just didn't seem to take any crap. With both the men and women that they encountered on screen, uh, and so they've always been two actors who I would pretty much watch anything that they've been in. simply be for their presence, for their stage presence, because like Grant, they have something that at the time just drew you in and made you want to pay attention to them. And by the way, you may get a good movie out of it as well. So I would say those are the top three off the top of my head, at least, that I can think of. Maybe Ingrid Bergman. I know Criterion has a documentary on Bergman. If I can remember the name here, Ingrid Bergman, excuse me, in her own words. It was produced in 2015, and it's an excellent documentary that if you're watching her films, it kind of gives some insight to her life, what her life was like, because she was from Sweden, came up in the Hollywood system. Eventually, became a big star, and her career was derailed at one point in time after she decided to leave her husband and marry an Italian director, Roberto Rossellini. And that union did not last, but it yielded a couple of excellent films, including one of my favorites of hers, it's a film called Stromboli. Which is about, she plays this woman who is a refugee and who marries like this Italian soldier, and she thinks she's going to live maybe not so much a life of luxury, but a life that is much more comfortable than the life that he provides for her. And the film is set on a volcanic island. So you can sense that something's about to boil over, and in this case, erupt. And for her, it's her, just discontent with the way things are going. So it's to see those performances and then to see this documentary, and like I said, it let me know that not only was she a great performer, but her life informed a lot of her performances. And sometimes that's always cool too, because some people can just show up and just turn it on, whereas others, you learn a little bit about their life, their life story, and you start to see those little things bleed into it. And I definitely felt that with some of her performances and in a lot of these films.
Right on. All right, let's move things along. I have this movie blitz. Everyone that comes on, I run through a series of questions. Not as many tonight because we've already had quite the intro. But now that you've conquered Criterion, what's your next big movie milestone in terms of watching goal?
That's great. So I've been number one. It would have been my watch list, and actually right now it still is my watch list. I want to do something different with my watch list because over the past few years that I've joined that I've been a part of Letterboxd, I've just been adding films to my watch list, and occasionally I'll watch one, and then I'll realize, oh, that was on my watch list, and now it's gone. So that's great. But there were more being added than there were being watched. So I went through my watch list earlier this year, and I deleted pretty much all of about 1,300 films. There were about 1,400 on the watch list. I just deleted about 1,300. I have some of them that are saved on an Excel spreadsheet, so if I needed to go back and check them out, I can do that. But I boiled it down to everything that was over 4 stars, and a few that were below 3 stars that are like probably cult favorites. Like there's a film on there, Samurai Cop, that is just it's probably like a B movie that I am interested in checking out. And then there's some in between that when I saw the poster, and I'm sure you felt this way, like you see the poster and you go, oh yeah, I remember that, I need to watch that. And so I've got a few of those on the list. So there's about maybe 98 left. And so over the course of this year, I'll knock those out, as many as I can. Hopefully they're streaming. And then after that, I think I either want to dive into the best international films or all of the Palme d'Or winners, because because of Criterion, I am very much attuned to the rhythms of international cinema, of art and artists who don't have a lot of the resources that Hollywood studios can provide. And so rather than just wowing you with the the technical and which leads to like just the spectacle. And for me, like the Marvel films and other blockbusters come to mind. You just have to tell a story, and usually that involves one or more humans experiencing something that we can all relate to. And I find that when the awards are handed out for Best International Film, like those types of films tend to triumph over others. And then, with Cannes the kind of film festival, it's a little bit more highbrow, but at the same time, there are some very, deeply human stories that tend to triumph. So those are the types of films that appeal to me. Those are the types of films that I think I'm just drawn to in general, in addition to being like groomed as a result of going to the Criterion Collection. And so that's probably where my focus will be for the near future. But I've also thought about maybe exploring a particular genre. So maybe like, reading about as much as I can about the action genre, and maybe starting with, some early Hollywood films in the 20s, and then selecting a group of films, and then just charting the evolution of a genre over the course of many decades. I do find that despite, regardless of the film's quality, that would probably keep me a bit more engaged and lead to some better writing. But I'd like to do something with that, with like action, horror, science fiction, and just really explore it and see, like I said, how those different styles of films have evolved, and maybe start another film club with maybe another Letterboxd member. It's a commitment, because when you tell, not when you say I'm going to watch this, but when you tell another person, hey, I'm going to watch this. And we both been guilty of like saying, hey, okay, it's time to watch this, and then 3 weeks later, I'm following up with you and saying, hey, Justin, I haven't watched this yet. I'm doing it tonight. When I told you I'd watch it 3 weeks ago. So
more times than I care to admit.
Yeah. So I've been very careful about who I engage with on that. But there's another gentleman that I met. He lives in Egypt. His name's Abdallah.
Awesome.
And he and I have talked about doing something similar. And I'm really looking forward to that, because we haven't settled on the film yet, but I am interested to see what he picks. And, if he picks something that say is like an Egyptian production, I'm excited not only to be able to watch it, but also to be able to talk to an Egyptian about that film. And because Hollywood dominates the film industry, you and I can normally talk about Hollywood films and American culture, and rest assured that we are our opinions are superior, they're validated, and they won't be questioned to a degree. But when it comes to like international cinema, that's not always the case. So I'm excited to be able to like connect with him, and like I said, if we do go down that road, to be able to get his opinion on a few things, because like I said, the more opinions you get, the better.
Yeah, that sounds a very exciting adventure. What would you say is your favorite current director? What's the director that's making films out now that would first in line to go see their next feature kind of deal?
It would absolutely be. You want me? Do I get more than one, or you want me to just give you one?
Whatever comes to mind, Adam. I'm not,
because like I said, okay. Well,
let's
just do a man and a woman. So if it's a man, it's got to be Yorgos Lanthimos.
Nice.
I find his films to be incredibly funny. Mm-hmm. I find his outlook on cinema to be engaging, because if you take a film like The Lobster, and you just play it straight, then it's just about a guy who's divorced trying to find a mate. But from Yorgos's view, the importance that we placed on couples, on relationships, on dating, and the fact that we treat single people, particularly single people of a certain age, as outcasts, is just I find it to be hilarious. And so, taking that approach, the approach that he did with that film, along with the killing of Sacred Deer, along with Dogtooth and a few others, is just
Favorite.
questioning the favorite, questioning family structures, questioning, the in the case of the favorite, like the royalty within that film, and power structures, and the way he goes about it is just, I find, just so interesting, and it's just so fascinating, because it is not everyone's cup of tea, but I just feel that I haven't seen his first feature, Canetta, which I have a copy, I think, on my computer. I just haven't gotten around to watching it because it isn't, highly regarded, and it very rarely is it discussed. Also, I just don't want to watch a crappy quality like copy of the film. I'd rather watch something a little bit more high quality. But I should get around to it eventually, because as with all my favorite directors, I just enjoy, like I said, exploring their works. So Yorgos is like at the top of the list. I would say, if someone else had to share that award, I would give it to Celine Sciamma. I think her works are so deeply, like, empathetic, and they recognize how fragile human beings are, how special and protective that we need to be of our emotions. But when those emotions do arise, there are in the case of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, or
Okay.
Petite Maman, I just find that there are people there. When those emotions come rushing forward, like there's always someone there to kind of like cradle you, and give you a hug and tell you it's going to be okay. And her films, tackle heavy themes, but they never feel that way when you're watching them, because they're always filled with love and a concern for the wellness of her characters, most of whom are female, and like I said, I do think, and I've written about this, I just think it's different when a woman tackles a film. Like, there's just, there's a difference. Obviously, there's a difference between, like, mothers and fathers, and the type of care and that they can provide, and men as fathers can be tender, can be caring, but there's nothing like a mother. And as a film director, she kind of, like, she gives, like, off that energy of, like, what I mean, no matter what happens, everything is going to be okay. I'm here for you. And so I always, like I said, enjoy when something new comes out, and of hers comes out. Lastly, I have to admit this, or excuse me, I can't let this pass without mentioning him. But Michael Haneke is another one of my favorite directors. I wish him well. His birthday is a month from now. I just looked it up. I didn't know that by heart. I assure you. But he will be, let's see, 81 years old, and I'm hoping and praying that he has something else up his sleeve, because I have a box set of his, and I can, and that's to go back to your earlier question. I may go through those films again, just to just kind of dive into his stuff again, but I am hoping that he has something else that he wants to say about our current moment. I'm sure that he could use, if you think of a film like Benny's Video, I'm sure he could take what is going on right now in terms of, like, the alternate universe that we seem to live in terms of, like, our internet culture and people being connected all the time, and probably turn that into something fascinating. So I hope that he has something else up his sleeve, but if not, we have his other works, and like I said, they'll be with us, and they're highly regarded, and he's just someone who, and I think we're going to get into this when we talk about Dear Zachary, but he is someone who made me, and I'm just going to use the word appreciate, because I can't think of another word, or maybe I'm more attuned to what violence is and the impact that it has on the victims, and their immediate circle because of watching his films. And so when someone dies in a big blockbuster or in an independent film, like I think I understand the meaning of that loss and what the type of devastation that I think it brings about within that film world, no matter what the film is, because of his films. Because his films are there. There's a point to all of the violence. He's not just showing you someone's death or someone being harmed just because he's just for the sake of entertainment. And so watching his films at such, an early age as a cinephile, definitely, that was brought to my attention after reading, listening to interviews, reading reviews of his work. And now that, I have, gone through that and watched, his entire filmography and watched so many other films, like I always come back to him because like violence is, I can accept like a certain amount like of intensity and violence in a film, but it never it never leaves me. That I guess what never leaves me is the fact that someone is being harmed, you know what I mean? And that they're, you know what I mean, if this were to occur in real life or, you know what I mean, like that this would be a very, very serious issue. And it's not something where someone's just going to get up the next day and be okay. And so it's, that's more of like on a psychological level, like the things that he's done. But like, I think all three of those directors, like I said, their films are challenging. They're, they're empathetic, they're funny, they tackle, like I said, real world issues which is something that I'm in because I'm not drawn to films that venture outside of like the world that we live in as much as I am, you know what I mean, as much as other people are. But like I said, all three of those filmmakers do it for me, and along with some others that, we don't have time, obviously, to get into.
What's your favorite from Heineke?
Ooh, good question. I'm going to go out and say it's either Benny's Video or it's The Piano Teacher. I'd say Benny's Video simply for the reason that it is the film that is more closely tied to the culture that we live in now, where people want to be seen, want to feel, but because, everything that you can seemingly experience as a human being is at our fingertips. We're almost numb to what it means to like actually feel joy at times, to actually feel pain, because it doesn't matter if you can't feel it yourself. You can feel it vicariously through others, but at times you can be overloaded with it, particularly on the negative side, to the point where it no longer affects you. And I think that's what happens to the young boy in Benny's Video, who commits an act that I'm not going to describe here because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but that is so horrific. But then he is just so detached from his his crimes that you have to wonder if there's anybody living in there. And but on the other hand, with The Piano Teacher, you have someone who is very much alive in the character played by Isabelle Huppert, but at the same time, she doesn't know how to express those emotions, and they come out, and they come out in a way that are so off-putting to the person who she's trying to court, and so perverse that once she does get what she wanted, it's such a warped form of intimacy and affection that you can't help but be you can't help but be moved by like this person's need for connection, because at the end of the day, that's what she was after.
Pathetic character for sure.
It really is. It really is. And I mean, like I said, another film that I don't want to spoil because the ending when she's in the concert hall and the action that she takes is just very. I found it to be very, very moving. And like I said, I just don't know if if that film was in the hands of another director, if they could have accomplished what Michael Haneke accomplished with that and his other films.
So beyond samurais, what's a feature of a film that once you get into it, you weren't expecting to see something like this? It instantly gets you hooked in. Like Russian history is my go-to. Anytime Russian history comes up, I'm instantly like connected. See what's going to happen next. Any topics that spring to mind in that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So films about vulnerable populations will always get my attention. So films about women, any story about a woman, or a group of women navigating treacherous territory, or films about children, always seem to get my tug at my heartstrings. Because if you think about, let's say we were, in a war, the most vulnerable population there would be women and children. Women are, would be subject to, they're typically left on the home front. They're subject to like sexual assault and other forms of manipulation. Children are at the mercy of, their parents and the means that they may or may not have. And you think about, there were some children who, during World War II, excuse me, were able to be transported to other parts of Europe or America because their parents they were both perceptive and they recognized what was happening around them, but they also had the means to do so. But then you have some children who, whether they be in the case of a war on the side of the good guy like America and France and Britain, or the bad guys like Italy, Germany, Japan, and I'm using good and bad loosely here because at the end of the day the Germans, the Italians, they were at the mercy of their leaders. But at the end of the day, they in the case of the children, for instance, I'm thinking of Germany Year Zero. It's a film, a neo-realist film by I want to say it might be by Roberto Rossellini, who we were just discussing because he was married for a brief period of time to Ingrid Bergman. But Germany Year Zero is just like such a devastating film because you have this child navigating the actual ruins of World War II after Germany has just been bombed into almost bombed into the smithereens by the Allied forces, and you have this child who's just trying to navigate and find some semblance of hope in an environment and amongst people and an environment that has just been utterly destroyed. So films, like I said, that tie into those themes have always stuck with me. And to bring up another example of that, I mentioned a film that you may or may not have seen it's called Lore, Lore. It's by Kate Shortland. It's about a young girl who and her siblings who, I guess they were, from what I remember, they were the children of high-ranking Nazi official, and it's near the end of the war is near, or it's been announced that Germany has surrendered, and they're trying to navigate their way across the countryside to get to a family's home. And obviously, with this young girl who's in the film is in her teens, she's obviously can be subject to harm given her vulnerable position. But you also have these children who are also have been indoctrinated and are now trying to navigate both like this physical trek, but also like this reprogramming because they're trying to figure out why the world around them has crumbled, both like ideologically as well as physically. And so it's another World War II film, but in this case, the protagonist is is a woman, and she, like I said, it is a journey that, like I said, I found to be riveting, and just goes back to the my point that, like I said, those types of films, like I said, pull me in, because when you have, like I said, if you have someone like a Tom Cruise on screen, you know that at the end of the day, he's going to save the day. Same with the Will Smith, and there are probably some women that I can't think of. I'll just throw out like Meryl Streep, who is going. You think of a film like The Post, like they're always going to be able to step up and save the day.
Right.
But when you're, and not even the case of like a Meryl Streep, but like, because I'm specifically thinking of her position in that film as like the editor-in-chief of the Washington Post. But in the films that I just described, you have people who have nothing, you know what I mean, and are trying to rebuild from scratch. And there are probably numerous other films that I can name. And so, like, there's the vulnerable positions that they've been placed in. I don't want to say that they placed themselves in, because they're in the case, those two films, we're talking about children. So the vulnerable position that they've been placed in, no matter their position in life, because some people would consider them Nazis, but at the end of the day, it's much more complicated than that. And so they have my deepest sympathies for that reason. And any film that tackles a story of a child, or in this case, or in the case of another film, which is another film about World War II called A Woman in Berlin. Any film about a woman who, or a group of women who are in a difficult position that they can't find a way out of, they'll always have, it'll always get my attention, and it'll always have my sympathies.
Nice. What's your go-to movie for just some dumb fun, maybe after a night at the bar?
So if I had to pick one film, I would pick there's a film that called Miami Connection. And it's kind of like that other film I was telling you about, Samurai Cop. And I'm not sure. Have you seen Miami Connection?
I think I've heard of it.
Okay, all right, yes. I mean, it's a cult classic at this point. It's directed by this guy, Y.K. Kim, who, I can't remember what he was doing at the time, but I believe he mortgaged or refinanced his home to get the proceeds to direct this film. And he and his buddies, they had to be in their 30s at the time, but they play these college students who are in a rock band, who are trying to stop like these motorcycle riding ninjas who are poisoning the streets of Miami and flooding the streets of Miami with cocaine. And it's just like the film, like on a narrative level, like on a technical level, it's at that point where it's just so bad it's good, both in terms of the acting, in terms of the editing. Like, if you're trying to figure out what good editing is, and you can't figure out what makes a good edit, what makes a good cut, when to keep a focus on a particular character, and so on and so forth, then watching these types of films is a great way to better understand it, because like this film has some of the worst acting, the worst editing. The lighting wasn't too off-putting and things like that, but I mean, they got so much wrong that it just ended up being right. It ended up just being not even dumb fun, but just fun, because you can tell that there's like an intention there. It's always cool when, like I said, there's an intention there to make a good film, but you missed the mark, and you missed it by a lot. But at the end of the day, it's still fun. And so Miami Connection would absolutely be that film. And I'm sure, like I said, that's why I'd love to, find others like it. But I just don't think that, for many reasons, that there's going to be another film when I'm like reaching down to like the bottom of the barrel here. You know what I mean? Like that's going to like provide that level of fun that film provides, because I'm sure you have yours too, where like you don't even have to watch the film. You probably haven't seen it for a while, but like you just start thinking about it and you just start laughing. Like that's kind of where I'm at, like with my Miami Connection, because I've seen it a couple times and it never fails to just leave me in stitches.
Nice, nice. Any pet peeves about movies? Stuff that really just gets under your skin about something or another comes up in the story or in the way they made it.
It would probably have to do with producers, director producers telegraphing emotions.
Okay.
Like I'm watching, I'm finishing up it was just released by Criterion, the 5 films by Steve McQueen, the Small Axe miniseries that he directed a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm finishing those out. And I haven't seen a McQueen film since Widows, but Widows was like a traditional Hollywood feature. It had Hollywood stars. It was fast paced. It was exciting. There were a few McQueen touches to that film in terms of the silence in that film.
Okay.
But the one thing I've always loved about McQueen is that he does not telegraph his emotions. Like he's more if he does, it's done visually. Like if you think of 12 Years, the scene from 12 Years a Slave, where Solomon Northup is hanging from a tree, and it's a form of lynching, but it's done more as like a threat and torture to say what he did prior to that. Don't do this again. But rather than zooming in on Chiwetel Ejiofor's face and allowing you to just see the pain that he's experiencing. I believe that it's shot from like a long shot, and so you've got this wide view of the plantation and the surroundings, and there are people mulling about occasionally in the background, but there's just this image of him just like standing, like hanging, being almost hanging there for what feels like.
It's kind of like sinking in the mud, from what I recall.
Yeah,
it's almost like you
yeah.
watch it so long, you feel like you're getting strangled along with him. It's
absolutely.
remarkable.
And so I am not a fan of filmmakers and works that telegraph both where the plot is headed and which tells me how I should feel. Because if you're telling like a story that is in some way relatable, that is relevant to our current times, or is about a piece of history that is deemed important enough to spend millions of dollars on, then like your audience should be able to connect with that film and do so without you nudging them in a certain direction. And so for me, and like I said, I think this comes back to Criterion, it comes back to international cinema. There are times when it is necessary, to tug at those strings, both, in terms of like the actual compositions that are incorporated into the film, but also in terms of like being able to, generate a certain feeling within your audience. But I do feel as if certain directors and probably producers go a bit overboard and don't recognize that, whatever emotion they're trying to extract from the viewer, it's actually having in the case of me as a viewer, it's actually having the opposite effect. And I'm sure, I'm not alone when it comes to that feeling.
Do you ever turn that part of your brain off whenever you're maybe watching a children's film where they're kind of training those young minds to maybe kind of fall in line with the story they're telling, if you know what I mean?
Yes, I can, and that has happened. But I will say this, at the end of the day, those films are directed by adults who are trying to convey a message to a younger population, and so like I said, I'm always able to your point, understand. Okay, this is what I'm getting. This is what I'm going into. This is who it's directed by. This is who the film. This is what the film. Or excuse me, this is what the film intends to do. This is who the film intends to reach. And so, yes, I can absolutely turn it off. But I do think there are companies, and like I said, I'm just going to highlight Pixar because who I think have done like a wonderful job of kind of going against the grain because those I say it again and I say it every time I watch a Pixar film and I write a review about it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that those films are for kids. Like I think that they are for the adult version of those children that are watching it at the time because there's no way that you can watch a film like the last film that I gave 5 stars to was Inside Out. I don't think you can watch a film like that at that age and really pick up on everything that is taking place within that film, both in terms of the visuals and in terms of the complex emotions that are you know made into, I guess, physical characters in the film, but also that have that you need to interpret in order to better understand what is happening. Like a child can recognize sadness, but there's literally a moment in the film where joy is trying to motivate sadness to continue on the journey with her and Bing Bong, and sadness literally sits down, puts her arm around Bing Bong, I believe, and it's like you're literally sitting with sadness. Like you've heard that term over and over and over again, but to like a child, I think isn't going to pick up on that at that time. But like let's say a decade, 15 years goes by, you pick that film up again in your late 20s, early 30s, or more time would probably have to pass, but you get what I'm saying. Like you come back to that film and you realize like they're operating like on a different level, and so you know what's going on. I would assume that as a child, you know what's going on. You can follow the story from point A to point A, or from A to Z, but once you watch that film as an adult, like I said, a whole nother world just opens up as your fears of maybe parenting or your anxieties in terms of your career and your identity and what that means for your life's trajectory. Like all of those things are explored in like a film like in like the Toy Story series, or a film like Wall-E, which is all of which I haven't seen in a while, so I won't comment on it. But like I said, if I go back to it now, having not seen it for a decade, like it's probably going to have a totally different, meaning for me. So, there are times where I can turn my brain off, but I know at the end of the day that, like I said, there are just some greater themes there at play that I can relate to and I can appreciate because of where I'm at in my life. And one of the things that I'm always excited about is if I'm at a Pixar film and there's a young child in that audience, I'm always excited for that child because I'm like, you're gonna revisit this in like 10 to 15 years, and it's gonna change your life. It's gonna it's just gonna do something to you that you're just not ready for, especially the Pixar films. I can't say the same thing for like DreamWorks and a few others, just because I haven't watched,
Mm-hmm.
as many of those films as I have like the Pixar films. But man, like I said, I can turn it off. But like I said, there's always that part of me that knows that there's something, deeper going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it is always a treat to go into those kids' films and see that there is more intent. My favorite of the Pixar's is Ratatouille. I love
Mm.
seeing an artist in their craft and how criticism is put into that, and how anybody can achieve anything is put into that. Oh gosh, that movie tickles me every time. It's not just about a rat controlling a guy. It's there's a lot more there, and it's really enjoyable.
Yeah, but like I said, you go into it as a child and you think, oh wow, that's the rats are. I was told that mice and rats are bad and they're not clean or
Hmm.
whatever. But there's this rat helping out this guy. That's really funny. But then, like I said, you go back to it, you know what I mean. It's just like a whole other. It's a story within a story. Like there are two things happening at once, which is like a beauty of those stories.
One last question before we get into our film. Any Oscar nominees this year that you're interested? Have you seen any of them, and any favorites?
Yes, I have. So I'm going to pull up the list right now. Let's. If I had to guess, and say, what film was going to win
Mm-hmm.
the Academy Award, I wouldn't be able to give you an answer. I think that I don't want to say it's too close to call, but I haven't seen enough to say for sure whether an Avatar: The Way of Water or All Quiet on the Western Front or an Elvis because would win because I'm not I don't think I have or I paid it close enough attention, I should say, particularly with some of these features. But although there have been some reviews on Letterboxd that I've read about films like Elvis, for instance, that have made me much more interested, like in that film. And I may get around to watching Avatar one day, but like I said, I
Try
have
to
to
see
watch
it
it
in the
first.
theater. It's quite the experience.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So, but I mean, for me, to go back to like our earlier, um, some of the other answers that I was giving you, like the human films, like the like about two humans that don't have a lot of special effects, CGI and makeup and stuff like that. Like those are the films that always stick with me. So a film like Banshees, or even All Quiet on the Western Front, are the two films that stick out for me, simply because I can relate to the human experience without getting bogged down in all of um, the technical and like the makeup and all of the other crafts that sometimes go into a performance. Like this is a film about someone or Banshees, that is. This is a film about someone who is taking stock of their life and is trying to cut bait, and another guy doesn't want that to happen. And there's just this tug of war, just back and forth, that I just found so appealing because losing those types of connections can be very, very hard on an individual. And I do find that rather than seeing the rise and fall of, let's say, like a Uber's like celebrity like Elvis Presley, like it's much more relatable for me, at least, to see this friendship fall apart and to think about what it would mean for me as an individual if something like that happened in my life. So that's just kind of like an insight into my thought process. Not because as I'm watching those films, like that's what I'm thinking. I'm sure there's something about Elvis that I can relate to. I do enjoy some of his music, but like there's just certain parts of his story, his upbringing, and his trajectory in life that I just can't relate to. But when I see Banshees,
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to that. Um, and like I said, I'm sure there are other films too,
Mm-hmm.
on that list, that you know caught my attention, and that I would gladly vote for if I was given the chance to.
I would say the most interesting thing about the Elvis film is how he ended up stuck in Las Vegas and what that ended up doing for his legacy. So
Mm. Okay. See now, like I said, that's another chat with the Letterboxd. Remember, it's like now I'm even more interested in checking out. There's also like I need to watch Top Gun. There's no point about it. Like I need to watch the original Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick because there's also a few things that it says about star power, Tom Cruise's star power, as well as our culture, which both in terms of our affinity and like glorification of like the military and a few other things that I just there's some things there that I think I'll find really interesting about Top Gun, in addition to like just like the story itself. And it's also like such a part of like pop culture now. Like I know I don't think this is a spoiler at this time that Val Kilmer's character dies, in the first film. So like I know that just because it's a part of
well, the
like
Goose
it's a
character,
part of culture.
not Iceman.
Goose, not Iceman. Okay, so but I know that somebody dies, and
Right.
it's very important to like Top Gun Maverick and
Mm-hmm.
the direction
Oh
that
yeah.
film takes. So that is that's just another film that I need to dive into just so I can be part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Because people go, you hear somebody say, on TV or in real life, I got the need for speed. And you're like, I know where that comes from, but I need to be able to connect it to the film. So there are a variety of reasons why I want to dive into a lot of these films, even if they wouldn't, even if they were up on the marquee. Like even I may choose After Sun over Top Gun Maverick, or Blonde over Avatar: Way of the Water.
Have you seen
Way of
Tar
Water.
yet?
Yes, I have, and I think I'm going to go see it again in theaters. Like that film
Ooh,
has stuck with me
that's my
for
favorite of the year.
reasons. Yeah, for reasons that I can't describe, it's just stuck with me. I think Kate Blanchett's performance was incredible. I think there are elements of horror in that film that I found really interesting for a
Hmm.
director like Todd Field, who the last time I remember watching a film of his was In the Bedroom, which came out like 15 years ago,
Oh wow.
and I don't remember like any like horror being a part of that film, but there's definitely like this anxiety and something that I can only describe as maybe her past, creeping up on her in the film Lydia Tarr, that is,
Hmm.
and like it has just stuck with me, and it's probably something that I want to eventually write something about, but I need to see it again, and I do want to see it again on the big screen. So I think I'm going to do that here within the next week or so.
Awesome. All right, let's get to this feature. I always start with a quote. Um, on the afternoon of November 7th, 2001, my sister called to tell me that Dr. Andrew Bagby, my closest friend since age 7, had been killed. My name is Kurt, and I am a filmmaker. Andrew appeared in every movie I made growing up. I decided to make a movie to travel far and wide, to interview everyone who ever knew and loved Andrew. So we settled on Dear Zachary after I looked at your watch list and we came up with a few titles and this one stood out to you. How come?
Mhm. It stood out to me, number one, because of the ratings. Typically, if I try not to let the ratings of others, but in this case, the people I follow, influence me. But when you see a film that's rated 4 stars or 4.3, I think there's a 4.3 average on Letterboxd,
Oh wow.
and you scroll down to your activity from friends and you see nothing less than 3.5 stars, that's impressive to me. Especially, for I'm not sure if it's the case for you, given the amount of people that you follow, but I'm sure there's some people that you know of whose work you like, and you may start to pick up on some things like, oh, this person doesn't really give out a lot of 4-star reviews, 4.5 stars. But there are some people on my list, or excuse me, on my activity feed who gave this film like 4.5 stars, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this woman doesn't give out like 4 stars to anything. There's someone I follow, Jenna, who is kind of like me, where she's kind of just stingy with the stars, man. And but she gave it 4.5. I was scrolling down to some of the reviews from other people, and you get everything that it's just like you could just sense, like when someone writes a review, you can just sense the pain in that review from them having to experience this all over again. Like that tells you something about a film, not just that extends beyond its technical merits. Although this film does have a lot of good things going for it, technically, and in terms of its editing, that we can probably discuss. But like this just seemed to touch people in an emotional way that I can't describe any other films doing, and so I was eager to check it out. And like I said, when you see something that's like a 4.3 average, anything above like four stars, like the average 4 stars, like that always, I always perk up. And so, Dear Zachary was there. I thought, like I said, also that it would lead to a good discussion between the two of us. So I was ready to dive in, and but at the same time, I was totally unprepared for what I saw.
Absolutely. So let's talk about some first impressions and maybe stuff that surprised us. For instance, I had no idea this was going to be a true crime documentary until I saw the whole MSNBC thing in the very front. I was like, oh, okay, I don't watch these. So, but now I'm
Mm,
watching one. How about you?
mm. Yeah. So I went in blind, and this I am the same way with most of the films that I watch. Like I know I listen to a lot of podcasts, film podcasts, and so I know about certain films that are coming. I know about the directors. I know what people are saying about it, but I'm always um, quick to skip over any spoilers, or if someone says that this is great and it tackles this subject and you need to see this, I just put a note in the back of my mind and I kind of just move on with my day. So by the time I do end up getting around to see a film, usually I, have those remnants of maybe the thoughts of others and maybe some comments, or maybe I saw that someone that I really respect on Letterboxd gave it a high review. But very rarely do I dive into a film knowing a lot about its subject matter, whether it's a based on fact, or if it's a fictional film. So with this, I wasn't interested in anything other than what I saw on the banner. And if you're looking at the banner on Letterboxd, I mean, you may assume that it's a film about two friends because there's a picture of Andrew Bagby.
In a way, it is.
And it certainly is, until it dives into the heart of the film, and you totally realize that you're going in a totally different direction, and then the film takes you in a completely different direction after the fact. But I eventually, I went over to the page one day, the main page for this film on Letterboxd, and I saw the words "murdered." And so I saw, okay, somebody dies. We're going to learn about it and maybe learn about who did it. And I'll just throw this out here, and then we can kind of build on that. But this was a film, like I said, I saw the word "murdered," and I'm thinking, okay, this is true crime. Eventually, justice will be served. And I watched the film on Tuesday, and I watched it again tonight before we, and then finish it up a few minutes before we signed on. And I'm thinking to myself, the first time I watched the film, that I'm waiting for justice. Justice will be served. Justice has to come. And justice never came. And that is probably the strangest thing about this film, because there were just, and I know I'm getting, kind of.
Did you see the YouTube postscript video?
I did not. And
okay.
So like I said, I think I'll stop here just so you can talk about that. But like I said, I was, like I said, just waiting for a resolution that wasn't there, because, and I think that's a testament to Kurt Kuhn's direction, because he does a great job of setting you up to think that you're going to receive some sort of catharsis, but it doesn't. And then, the second time around, I'm just like staring and thinking about this title again, a letter to a son, about his father, and like there's just something about that title too that just suggests that like maybe that there's like something that's like unresolved or unknown, you know what I mean? And that's kind of touched on later in the film when you're talking about grief and how to move on. I think there's a doctor in there who kind of mentions that briefly, but there's just something about the title too that just like stuck with me the second time around. And so there's just a lot to it, and I'm just going to stop there because I don't want to like I said, continue to ramble on. But tell me more about this postscript, because I know that there were some things were still in the works in terms of like bail reform and some of the developments related to the case and the Bagby's efforts to get some change.
Well, I do want to start with how I kind of came into it, which I think was the wrong approach. Since I knew this was a gut-wrenching film, I kind of had my guard up. Like, I didn't want it to get me. I was very... And that's really not the goal of this film, and I didn't realize that until like almost the very end. Because in a way, he's a very manipulative filmmaker, but in a way, because ultimately the film's making a political argument that reform is needed. And we see that, in these extreme examples. Let's see. So one of the things that stood out is it does feel like a home movie. And I've made plenty of my own home movies. So I was seeing kind of the editing. I was kind of keying in on like what images he was using. And one of the really, really clever things he does is the repetition of images, which the more I thought about it, the more you think he inserts this like feeling of knowing Andrew throughout the whole thing. Like he makes you feel like you're a part of it. And there was even moments where I think he was trying to get you to project maybe your own family. And like there's an instance where his parents are handling young Zachary, and I was feeling compelled to think of my, when my own child was first born, and I was like, no, I am not putting my own child in my frame of mind for this story, because this is nothing but bad news. But
No, that's so interesting that you bring that up, because that was going to be one of my questions to you. How did you respond to this film as a father? Because I'm still a single man, no kids, and would like to have, but I'm someone who would like to have a family one day. But to have, to be married, to already have brought another life into this world, to watch what takes place in this film in terms of having that world that you've created and that you believe that you're going to get to experience with another person, to have it ripped away from you, not once, but twice, is something that was very, very shocking to me. And like I said, but I don't even have that connection to a son or a daughter yet. So I was going to ask you eventually, how you respond to this, but I think you started to answer my question, and I'd like to hear more about that. If there was something else that was going on in your mind at the time.
I like the thematic turn he takes toward the end, where he realized this was no longer going to be for Zachary, and he's just going to be for us. And I definitely gave all my boys a kiss on the cheek after I watched this. It was heavy. It was late at night when I finished it. I pretty much went straight to bed, and I just kind of let it sit with me. And then in the morning, I pulled up the YouTube videos, and the first one I came to is this postscript where he talks about, he sets it up. You kind of go through that again, but then he actually shows how it was shown to different filmmakers, or not filmmakers, but lawmakers at various festivals, and how reform eventually did come about. So I think I have Bill C-464 of Zachary's bill which strengthened the conditions of the bail in Canadian courts in cases involving well-being of children, was created after a citizen from Newfoundland watched the documentary. So yeah, it's nice to see that closure. You get a few more intimate moments with the parents. Not that we see them really get brought through the ringer. My question to you is, so this I mean, there's a level of manipulation in any film, but it's interesting how Kurt, he'll really sweeten the pot with making you feel so like you're Andrew's friend, and then he twists it, and we go into the details of these murders. And so I mean, this being his best friend in the whole world, I can see 100% why he would have the interest of showing Andrew and his parents as saints the whole time. Do you think there's any element of what's even her name?
Shirley, Dr. Shirley Turner.
Do you think some perspective, because I mean, her son appears at one point, but there's nothing really involving him. Do you think this being a one-sided documentary, what are your thoughts on that? I don't think it hurts it, because I don't think that's the goal, but it's interesting to see kind of a one-sided documentary have this kind of an impact.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. At the time, I wasn't thinking about that, because of the severity of the crime, you're always on the side of the Bagbies and Andrew's friends that he had made, who were attesting to his character and his warmth and the love that he had shown to them throughout his short time here on Earth. So I wasn't thinking about that. What I was thinking about, though, is the way in which Kuhn indirectly paints Turner as a villain and just allows her villain story to develop, not through any, I don't know, awful looking mug shots or, violent, maybe aggressive phone calls, things like that. All the types of stuff that you would see in maybe like one of those true crime TV shows that's recounting like something like this, but they're doing it in like a 30-minute segment or 40. They got 45 minutes to do it. And so they're really just throwing out the worst traits of the killer. Like we see a lot of images in this film where she's smiling, she's having a good time with
Looks
Andrew,
meek.
she's around the family, looks very meek, looks very um, in control of herself, even though she clearly wasn't. And that, I think, more than anything, that was the most unsettling thing to me, while at the same time being a masterful or just a great choice by Moon, because he allowed you to recognize that such
Like the writing was
deceitfulness.
on the wall, right?
It was on the wall, but that deceitfulness, like it isn't always going to come in the form of like the villain that you imagine, because her arc, or maybe not even arc, because we're dealing with a real person here, but
Mm-hmm.
the writing
With repetitive
seemed to be
tendencies.
on the wall. Those tendencies seem to be on the wall. The friends could see it, and in most cases, and uh, David Bagby alludes to this. Andrew's father, he alludes to this in the film. Like, typically if a relationship ends and someone's upset about it, like I said, you go punch a hole in the wall, you slash the person's tires or something like that. You don't shoot them, you know, once, in the cheek, in the chest, in the back, and then once in the back of the head, you know what I mean? And then beat them with a lead pipe or something like that. And then, you know, take that out on the next generation. So it's there was probably so much more that Kuhn could have shown. Hey, he probably could have added another 10 to 15 maybe minutes or more, just
The
showing
original
how
cut was 2 hours.
awful. Okay, yeah, yeah. So I'm sure within that 2 hours, there was some other stuff in there just to show how awful Shirley Turner was. But I think he used her, to your point, her meekness and her what seemed like vulnerabilities, like, and just her, um, her personality, just who she was, which was ultimately a mask, as a way of demonstrating how such violence can be wrapped up in such an unassuming package.
Hmm. Interesting. My favorite part of the film had to be the sequence where he's narrating her, how what Andrew puts her on a plane, and then what 3 days later she's right back at his door, and how he's narrating this like insane person like calling constantly from these points on the road, and how that's edited, and it's just chilling to watch. It reminded me a lot of Skotsky. There was moments in that
Mm-hmm.
film where the visuals are so overwhelming that you become uncomfortable, and I think he achieved the same effect there. And even more chilling later on whenever he's replaying those phone calls where he's like, "Oh, mommy loves you," and then we get kicked in the gut with Zachary. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's the editing in this film was just amazing. I think to go back to the point that you said, he does a great job of making you feel like Andrew Bagby, that you are part of the family, which makes the circumstances surrounding his death that much tougher to accept, both for him and Zachary. Uh, but there, like I said, there are these moments where the friends are talking about how kind Andrew was, or they're relaying a particular experience, and then it just cuts to like what's going on what was going on a few years later, as the case was moving through the Canadian court system, or there are just some a few gruesome images of Andrew's body, lifeless body, laying in Keystone State Park, or the images of Shirley just smiling, with a plate of food in her hand, or with Zachary in her hand. And it's just like thinking about it now, I just got, that whatever feeling, that, scientists or doctors would call that you get when you think about something that's just, bone
not in your
chilling.
stomach,
Like,
right? Yeah.
yeah, that knot in your stomach. Like thinking about that. And then, like I said, it's thinking about it now, it makes, like I said, it makes me realize that like you didn't have to, Coon's job was made easier by the fact that, like I said, this woman that you would just assume was as harmless as a lamb was like just capable of um, such an inhumane crime against two people, and like I said, it's the one thing that sticks with me, and I think he did a good job of editing that because, like for whatever reason, I don't know how to describe it, but like you start to talk to his friends again, and you start to feel like there's some hope, and you start to see like the light in their eyes, and then it's just pulled away from you, which is essentially what happened to Andrew's parents. Twice, in the film, and as well as the rest of his friends, especially because as Coon is making the documentary, he was making it as a memorial to Andrew and as a love letter to his son that he would never know. So everyone is talking about this as if we're going to get to the end of the film and we're going to see a grown-up version of Zachary, or someone who's old enough to sit next to his grandmother and grandfather, and they maybe they play him a VHS or a tape of Andrew, and they say, this is your father, and he kind of he recognizes it, and we shed a tear, but we realize, okay, at least he lives on and in the form of this child. But like that doesn't happen, and which is another thing that just leaves me, speechless, left me speechless as I was watching the movie, even now. So, like I said, the way that Coon is able to incorporate those movements in the film between joy and tragedy, it's just amazing. And one of the things I was thinking about is that there will be times in my life where maybe I'm listening to some good music, or just had a good conversation with someone and I'm feeling happy, but then I think about something that maybe isn't going that I have regret about or that I'm upset about, and then your mood just kind of like it's like an Inside Out when sadness touches the globe and it starts to turn blue. It's like it just comes over you because all of those emotions are like trying to coexist at the same time. And I thought that Coon did a great job of incorporating that into the film, because there are moments even when the Bagleys are very happy to talk about their child. But then, at the same time, I'm sure Coon had to then ask them about a particular incident, and then the entire tone just changes. And the way that he was able to fit that in the different parts of the film is especially, I found it like riveting, from like a technical standpoint, and just just heartbreaking from, just like on a person to person basis.
It's such a 1 in a million thing that came together here, because there's this remarkable amount of footage of him throughout his entire life that we wouldn't have unless his best friend was making this. And goodness, I mean, gosh, I lost my train of thought, but I want to get to my impression of this was a lot weirder. I didn't know it was true crime. Okay, that's what I was thinking about. So there's an interesting thing. There's kind of a tidbit for true crime fans who will probably often think of what they would do in this situation, and we do get that a little bit of some fantasy wish fulfillment kind of thing whenever his father's talking about I think at one point, I don't remember this in the film, but I was listening to another thing where it was saying that the parents were considering killing themselves right after they found out that Andrew had died originally. Yes. And then later on, they came up with the idea of how they were going to kill her and get rid of the body and stuff. And so that was very surprising to hear all that. And that was definitely, I'm sure, people that were oh gosh, how would I do? What would I do in their situation? Would definitely be on that same track of thought. So
and then to go back to the footage. Mm-hmm. There's something about maybe home movies, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, since you mentioned that you have dabbled in these and kind of shot some stuff with your family. But there's just something about home movies and film, actual film, and when I think of film versus a film image, picture versus like a digital image. And when I think of film, I think of a memory versus like a digital image, which is like sharp and clear, and it reminds me more of like the present moment, even though it's a moment in time as well. And so, like, just for me, and like I said, this is in this the filmmakers are working with, or in this case, the filmmaker. Kurt Coon seemed like he did everything according to the credits.
Yeah.
Like just the use of like the home videos and the still images, and the grain, like all of that, like had an effect on me too that I can't quite describe. And maybe you can maybe elaborate on this, because, like I said, there's just something about that which, I maybe some would call it nostalgia, but like you can't look at those videos and then think about the way that they were structured in order to make this documentary film, and think to yourself, this is nostalgic because of what about what has taken place with Andrew and his son. And so as I was watching it, for whatever reason, I think in addition to the crime itself, there was just something about the images and the fact that they, rather than feeling nostalgic about this time that gone past, and like there was something about it that just filled me with like a fear, and like a deep uncomfortable feeling. And like I said, I can't really articulate why, but I know it has something to do with the footage that was available, and I don't think it was probably manipulated in any way. But if you have anything to add on that,
I think it was probably I'm not sure exactly what it was shot on. I should probably look that up, but it kind of seemed like it was shot on DV tapes. So although it is definitely an enhancement over VHS, it's still that 480p DVD quality kind of video that does kind of have that older look to it. So I mean, I know whenever I pop in old VHS tapes, and the feeling of the 80s automatically comes alive. And so there was an older feel to it for sure. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on the piece of artwork that they used for the cover?
I was just looking at that. So
now that I think about it, it's almost like kind of an eerie, perverted kind of storybook looking thing. I didn't know what to make of it at first, because whenever I first heard this title, I was thinking this was going to be about some kind of pervert or some kind of unspeakable sexual act or something. So I didn't know what the heck I was getting into. So I'm glad it didn't go down that road. But God, it's a chilling story nonetheless.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I was thinking about the same thing too. And I mean, there's an even more heartbreaking poster. If you go to the change poster feature on Letterboxd, there's
the outline on the body.
An outline with the young baby walking over it. And it's just, I mean, now just like thinking about it, it's just, I'm just I can keep it together. But I mean, you've got the tree. You've got this young boy hanging in a tree. You've got the two, and it's just so hard to describe. You've got the two grandparents who are off kilter, I guess, if to use I guess the language that maybe would be best suited to kind of describe their positioning, but they're not upright, which kind of shows that they're a little bit off-centered, that their lives, that they've been toppled over in the case of this crime, and then you've got these images that you see in terms of I can't think of the scales that are used to
the justice,
like justice and stuff like that. So but you've got like the scales, the baby crib, the camera, and these other images that are once you watch the film are representative of the legal proceedings, the Alex's passion for photography, and then you have but you also have this young boy at the top, and the child is so young that I don't know if it's alluding to the fact that it's Alex or that it's Zachary, but I do find it interesting that there's the tree, and it's detached, but it's not detached at the roots. is
The roots
detached
running deep.
at the roots run deep, which, and to kind of bring it back to the film, at the and to jump all the way to the end of the film, I found it to be as life affirming as a film about this type of crime could be, because at the end of the day, the the Bagbies, had lost so much, but yet they were still surrounded by so much love, and it's amazing that despite all of the failures that we see in the film, there are institutional failures, both in terms of the police, the judicial system, that should cause you, due to the outcomes, should cause you to lose some type of faith in humanity. But yet, people are still there. They are still able to move on, and that's kind of talked about at the end of the film in terms of like going through the grief process and like how that whole process works. But because I'm not a doctor, I can't really speak on that. But I just find it amazing that despite all of these continued failures, like the people in this film, and even us to a lesser extent, are still able to move forward despite our setbacks. And for some, those setbacks are a bit greater than most. And I kind of get that sense that with this film, because I don't know a lot about trees, but if you sever a tree in the way that you do in this picture, but the tree is still rooted into the ground, can the tree grow back? Do you know? Or is it just
point? But I'm not going to claim to know anything, but I don't think it can grow back at that point.
I don't know. Yeah, see, I'm just wondering.
I think it's a stump, right?
Yeah, I guess it's just a stump, but I guess there's still roots there. It's still, despite what's been detached.
What's left, and it's the grandparents are left.
Yeah, it's still a tree. It's still.
Their memories are still there.
Yeah, exactly. Its essence is still there, and those roots, tell a story. All, themselves. The branches, the leaves. They're only, half the story. There's so much more to it. So yeah, it's there's a lot going on there that I'd love to talk to whoever designed that cover, because it is, it's just as heavy, like when you start to really dig into it, as the film itself. And like I said, I find that the alternate poster is just the alternate poster is a little bit more chilling. It's something that I think you'd see like on the front of a novel or something like that, or a book. Even though they used a different cover for the actual book that was written about this case. But yeah, that book, that cover is or poster is much more chilling than the one that the default banner, or default poster. But still, I mean, it's just as thought provoking as the film, and I mean, it just like diving into it is just as heartbreaking. Now, a question for you. There was nothing that I found disturbing about this film, because I'm sure we've seen plenty of people die on screen in a film or in true crime TV shows and things like that. So I wouldn't call what I saw disturbing, but I'm still trying to connect the emotions that I'm feeling, and give like words, words and thoughts, to them. Did you find is disturbing a term that you would use for a film like this, or would you categorize it as something else, given the way that Kuhn uses the fond memories of Andrew and of Zachary that the people in the film have for them, and in the way that, like, and I guess in the way that he incorporates into the story? Like, did you find it as
maybe
disturbing?
A little more tragic than disturbing. I think one chilling moment is that when he's talking about his one the guy he works with is talking about this whole deal where she showed up at his house and he knew Andrew would always be on time. And they're talking about Andrew's trusting nature and how she's so persistent and like he's pushing her away, but at the same time he's giving her the time of day, and then eventually bites him in the ass, and he ends up with a couple bullets in him. So to see someone's trusted nature be taken advantage of like that is very chilling.
No, that makes
and it totally speaks to everything about him. I mean, the guy was a best man in several weddings. I mean, that doesn't happen to everybody. You got to be quite the colloquial dude.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you bring that up, because I'm watching the film and the opening of the film, and I'm thinking, I'm seeing all these people attest to his character, and I'm thinking, I'm like, but then a few minutes later, Kuhn, throws in a piece, a part where he mentions that, Andrew has died. And so I'm thinking, like, okay, so you just said, like, he was like a real stand-up guy. People loved him, but he ended up dead. Like, what did he do wrong? You know what I mean? To go to your earlier point about, like, was he involved with, like, was he, like, some sort of
it seems like he did have maybe some bouts of depression in there, because he hated his job in Syracuse, and he was ultimately some kind of, he was in an emotional state to let this, older woman into his life somehow.
Yeah. And so, a part of me, I guess before we even got to that point, I thought, like I said, I thought that he was actually the one who was in the wrong, because I thought that, Kuhn was going to take us in the opposite direction, where, everybody's telling us what a great guy he is. And then, he just lays out the crimes that Andrew Bagby might have committed, but it's actually the exact opposite, which I thought was a great way to, like, start the film, and then, like, bring it back to the crime, and then, you dive into it again, because by the end, you're just overwhelmed by the fact that this was such a great person, and then you have Zachary, who everyone, particularly Kate and David Bagby, seemed to adore, who wasn't given that time to grow and develop and become a person, the person that maybe Andrew was, or maybe in some semblance of him, so that David and Kate could have some sort of their lives restored. Does that make sense? And like, to just see, like I said, the way that, like I said, to go back to, like, the editing and the way that Kuhn structured the story, like, to see that, like I said, the rug just continuously like pulled from under you is just like, like I said, one of the best aspects about this tragic story.
Any thought? So one thing I feel is missing is more about the fiance breaking up with him, and that point of depression that brought to, because I mean the whole time she's just talking like he's like this wonderful person, but there's really nothing about like how that ended, and so I'm kind of curious about that to an extent. But then again, you fall back into the fact that this was made by his best friend to create change, and what makes it such a remarkable story is it was actually changing as it was going on. I mean, he met Zachary, and then all of a sudden, Zachary's dead, and now it's a whole different film. He gave up on the film for a year until he could repurpose it, and gosh, I mean, kudos to him for getting this to happen, because I mean, this is like the ultimate tribute you could do for anybody, let alone like your best friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's to build on what you were discussing, or what you just mentioned about his ex-girlfriend. It's just one of those things where it's a circumstance that didn't go his way, but the second time around, I was also thinking about those little decisions that were made, or the little things that didn't go his way, because his parents mentioned that he was rejected from his original first med school application was rejected, and it was his mother who actually gave him the application to go to was it Newfoundland, or to apply.
Mm-hmm.
to that college. So as I was watching and
The twist
listening
of
to that,
fate.
and I picked up on that, it's just like this twist of fate because I mean, how many medical schools are
The
in the
world, yeah.
United States
Mm-hmm.
or in the world? And, how many could you go to where you wouldn't end up next to a Shirley Turner, a woman who just upends not only your life, but the lives of others? So um, there were, I mean, and all of our lives have these twists and turns or, these decisions that we make that then influence subsequent outcomes, and in some cases, the decisions of others. And I would never, suggest that, obviously, it was his mother's fault or something like that because she made that decision not, with the understanding that he would go get an
Mm-hmm.
education and then maybe, go to another part of the country or world or maybe come back to California and study medicine. Not that he would. Bring this person into their life that would disrupt and destroy everything that they loved. So it was that was a little unsettling to me because like I said, you feel for these people and for the decisions that you wish they could have made as they went through they navigated or made their way through life.
I think the last thing I wanted to mention before we wrap up is just getting into this nuts of this justice system where, of course, you have the lawyer after so long. He's like, well, this provision, that provision, it wasn't worded correctly, so this should all get thrown out. Because, I mean, how many times you get a traffic ticket and the cop or the lawyer does the same kind of thing, and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm off the hook. But
Mm-hmm.
and and the professional who said, there's nothing wrong with her psychological state, even though like he went down this whole list of like all these really obvious things, and it's really a matter of the fact that this wasn't presented in court is why it played out the way it did. So any thoughts on like the justice system, because I know it's really built in favor of the mother, but in this circumstance it's unfortunate it was.
So I think I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about this the first time I watched the film.
Okay.
I think we have a very, very limited worldview, in that you know we think that the world evolves like around America. There's a very myopic view,
Sure.
and as it relates to our legal system, we see the benefits of living in a republic and like the benefits of having a United States Constitution, and that has stood the test of time. But that doesn't mean that the system itself is perfect, as we can see throughout the history of this country. And so, oftentimes, and this happens all the time on the internet. I'm sure you're aware of this. Like people talk about, oh well, in Canada, we can just drive up there and get those whatever medication that you need that costs $5,000 in the U.S. Shoot, if we were in Canada, we could get
Yeah.
it for 50, or if we were in France, we could get XYZ for this, and they have you could go to Sweden and get certain people can go to college for free or stuff like
Right.
that, and so we're always looking, thinking that the grass is greener, but on the other side. But at the end of the day, the individuals in charge, you know what I mean, there are just as frail and subject to error as we are. And
Human.
this was really like if you thought the U.S. legal system was privileged, the wealthy, and maybe some folks over others, like Canada was like hold my beer, like this is like their hold my beer moment, like this was like from top to bottom, like there was just a complete and utter failure on every single level. Every single time someone within their judicial system could have done the right thing in order to prevent Shirley Turner from posting bail or from getting out or from skipping, going from, I think early in the film, it mentioned that she went from Latrobe and then went to Newfoundland, correct? Like Newfoundland.
Yeah, there's a lot of
like,
back and forth.
yeah, there was a lot of back and forth, but I think she went, that's what she did because they were trying to get her to California when they were having a memorial service for Andrew. But she went. They said, someone, the director, I guess, said that she wouldn't take the bait. So all of these moments, like I said, take place, and you realize it. Listen, like you feel so helpless, and I think that goes back to my earlier point about saying that like I was waiting for justice to be served, because you realize like at some point, like someone has to step up and say that, hey, this is wrong.
Obvious
This
flight
is
risk.
this person is an obvious flight risk. She's an alleged murderer, and for all the criticisms that I have about the American justice system, like we at least have a system where like someone who is in her position, because like we're such a like penal society, that someone in her position would not have seen the light of day, in terms of like, I'm sure the bail would have been, much stronger. The arguments for her incarceration while, her trial was taking place or before trial was taking place would have probably been a lot stronger, simply because like I said, we're more quick to lock people up. And like I'm not here to defend like the American justice system because there are also some major flaws, but like there were just like some missteps here that just
How about
boggle
that
my.
judge's reasoning about how she's no longer a threat to the public because she killed the one she wanted to kill? What?
Yeah. It's just like I'm just like, what are you talking about? And then there's this like the psychiatrist that acted as surety for her bail. I'm like,
And he was corrupt.
If that was like what do you do? Like, and so let's go back to your earlier point, because this was brought up by someone else that I follow, that Shirley's her life and what was going on with her legal team and everything that was taking place as she was in jail, out of jail, that wasn't given enough coverage. Like, what was like? There would have been, you could have added another 10 to 15 minutes to talk about what was taking place between her and her psychiatrist. That would have probably added some color. And probably given us some greater insight into what was happening, because that is just like, I just don't understand like why someone would do that who isn't family. I mean, and that won't bring Andrew back, it won't bring Zachary back, but it's just such an obvious misuse of like your abilities, your influence, that it warranted investigation in my case. And so I guess if there were any criticisms that I have of this film, and like I said, I really don't, simply because it's a true story, and I just don't know how to rate something like this, even though I can write about it.
Same boat.
Like I'm just, like I said, amazed at, like I said, the ways in which the people here were willing to, they weren't even abusing the system, but there was just something going on there that I just can't speak to. And I think that, you could probably do another documentary or incorporate it into this current documentary on the breakdown of what was taking place. But at the same time, there was that scene in the film where, or sequence where Kurt Kuhn is calling all of the people who were, in charge, like the woman who was the regional director for social services. He called 3 judges and a few other people, and none of them wanted to talk. So, but that itself ties back into the whole process of grief, because I'm sure that they could provide some answers, even if they just provided some insight into what they were thinking at the time. But we're never going to get that. The Bagbies aren't going to get that. And so it's just one of those things that you have to accept, that this was just a very tragic event. And you just have to move on, knowing that you're never going to get, the resolution that you seek, both and I'm speaking for the family here, and I'm speaking both for us as viewers, because there are just still some things that even with just whatever's going on inside me, just the weight that I feel after watching this film for a second time, like there's still some things that you're just like, you just have to accept and kind of move on after it.
Did you feel that the pacing kind of made it fly by, or was it more of a gradual slow burn? I found it a little slow for an hour and a half. Always compelling, but it definitely it kind of wore on you, and I wouldn't call it brisk by any means. How about you?
I found it to be brisk in the beginning,
Okay.
but then it kind of it slows down. Kurt is jumping, back and forth between times, and then when Shirley enters the picture, which is like very early on in the film, that's when it slowed down. But to my earlier point, because I knew nothing about the case, that's when it really got interesting, and that's when I was hooked. Yeah. And I'm thinking, okay, like this woman did this, but she's gonna get what she deserves, and that never comes. And then so you go from this like very like, okay, what's going on, and like, oh wow, that is tragic, but you know what, justice is gonna be served. We're going to see this happen. And then you're just like, you're given like an anchor and asked to hold on to it, I guess, if that makes sense. And then you're just weighted down by what comes after the fact. After you're given just this brief glimmer of like hope that despite this bad outcome, that something good can come of it. And then another bad outcome comes after the life of Zachary is taken from is taken by Dr. Turner.
Yeah. So to wrap up, yeah, I would definitely say it's one of the most well-crafted, compelling, ultimately ruthless docs I've seen. I can't rate it because it's just so hard for me to kind of wrap my head around that. I would definitely give it a heart and recommend that everybody check it out. It's for true crime. I'm not a true crime fan, but this is just something that people should be aware of, and it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah, it really is, and it's not my cup of tea. Even though, like I said, I think we can. If you have a few more minutes, I'd love to touch on this, because I am someone who is a proponent of what I call like the feel bad film, the feel bad ending. And if I had to define what that is and what and anti-escapist cinema as well, like I would just say that anti-escapist cinema is something that doesn't allow you to detach yourself from the outcome of what you're watching. And I think that this film is, like I said, it just sits with me. Like this will be something that I don't think will leave me, because number one, and I think the main reason is because it is something that actually happened. And when it comes to like the feel bad film ending, when I say feel bad, I'm not just referring to endings that end in tragedy like this film did, but endings that are unresolved, endings that I'm thinking of films like The 400 Blows, where like Antoine Donnell kind of just looks into the camera, and you're just kind of wondering, okay, what's next? Or a film like Pavel Pawlikowski's Ida, the film that won Best International Film a few years ago, about the young woman who learns about I think she's becoming a nun, but she learns about her family history, and as a result of an aunt who brings it to her attention. It's a fantastic film, but like at the end of that film, you know what I mean? She's kind of I'm going to spoil this film for whoever's listening to it. She decides to head back to where do nuns go? Is it the monastery, or am I?
Convent.
Convent. Yes, the convent. Thank you. She's heading back to the convent, and but there's this look on her face, and you don't know if she thinks she's making the right decision. And so that is a film that leaves things up in the air. The viewer doesn't receive a resolution, and they feel unsettled. But that unsettling feeling leads to further questions, and it's why we can sit here for nearly 3 hours and talk about films, because we're talking about something, including Dear Zachary, that has in its like DNA a level of, or I should say, a bit of um, that in it. You know what I mean? Where, like I said, you're never going to get the answers, but you will be able to sit and ponder and ask questions. And as a result, I think that you will, even in the case of a film like this, you will be rewarded for it because I think it's at the end of the day, even despite the what we watch, it is a well of like empathy, and like it does show that human beings are resilient, can survive, and can come together to do the right thing, or at least the best that they can under certain circumstances, these unfortunate circumstances, to help to pick themselves up and help others move on and move forward.
Well said. All right, thanks so much for joining me, Adam. Any socials you want to shout out? How should people reach out to you?
Letterboxd, man. Because here's the thing: you can get on
Yeah.
Letterboxd, and we can chat on Letterboxd. But I've got my my Instagram handle and my Twitter handle linked in the in my profile. So,
Okay.
like I said, but Letterboxd is it because it's the app that I spend the most time on, as you noticed, because I think you emailed me, or excuse me, DM'd me on Twitter in early January, and I didn't get back to you until like, or maybe like December, and I didn't get back to you until like mid to late January. So if you want to reach out to me, it should probably be done on Letterboxd, and if not Letterboxd, it should be Instagram. And then if I don't respond to you on Letterboxd or Instagram, it should definitely be Twitter. And then I'll probably take some time to get back to you, but I promise you I'll do it. But and I should say, Justin, it has nothing to do with you. I just, in order to be a little bit more mindful, a little bit more present, both when I'm by myself and when I'm with other people, I removed all of the social media apps from my phone. So when I'm using Letterboxd, using Twitter, when I'm using Instagram, I'm doing it all on the computer. And so, it has my attention there. But then, when I'm away from it, like trying to use, I'm not sure if you have them on your phone or not, but trying to use like Twitter or Instagram through your browser on your phone is hell.
Oh, yeah, that's no good. You gotta have the app.
Long story short, we know why it is, because you don't have the access to the full range of features, because they want you to get on the app so you can spend more time in the app, so that they can sell you more ads and then convince the advertisers that they're worth spending more money on. So it's long story short, I did it to be a bit more mindful. It's worked out well for me, but you know where to find me, and
Awesome.
Everyone else does too.
Please follow the Average Joe's Movie Clubcast on YouTube and look for my reviews. I'm Justin Peterson on Letterboxd. Have a great day, everybody, and keep watching great movies.